Well, thank you guys. We're happy to be here. Reed and I are going to actually go over the first presentation here. This is Reed Koeneke from Caerus Oil and Gas. He's our health and safety lead. And just before we get started, I was going to say we do have 3 presentations. If you guys can hold questions to the very end, there may be a chance we'll answer it throughout these 3 presentations.
Lindsey and I will talk about regulatory interface, and Josh will cover kind of a lot of things that we do as well, but they cover a little more just because of the human element. So Lindsey's up first.
Yeah, so what we wanted to make sure everyone understood in emergency response, incident response in general, we have a large regulatory framework. We are regulated by several different agencies, as you probably all know. So we're going to go over just some basic information on that, and then we're going to talk about some typical incidents that we may respond to and what those timeframes for notification might be. And then we're going to wrap up with some other best management practices that we employ generally as an industry. So on this slide here, we have COGCC Rule 906, and this requirement requires all operators to report a spill within 24 hours of discovery. And that spill is 1 barrel outside of containment and 5 barrels within containment. And then following the 24-hour phone call, you have 3 days, 72 hours to submit a formal report. In that notification, we submit the 24-hour report to COGCC. We also have to notify our local government. So here in the Piceance Basin, it could be Garfield County, Rio Blanco, or Mesa County. And then we also have to notify the surface owner within 24 hours. And if there's a federal connection, a connected action, we also have to notify the BLM. If it's a certain product, we would also include CDPHE in those notification procedures.
So this is COGCC Rule 602. It overlaps into the safety realm. And if we have an incident, any one of these, fire, explosion, detonation, or uncontrolled release of pressure, we have to fill out a Form 22 to the COGCC. Oh, sorry, I'll turn the mic back on. Apologize. Is that better? I'm a field guy. I'm a little rough around the edges. So we would then have to notify COGCC within 6 hours. Also, if anything impacts a member of the public, that becomes reportable to COGCC. COGCC reflects OSHA in their definition of reportable and recordable, and we'll get to that in just a second.
So, like I mentioned before, if there is a connected action with BLM, so a BLM mineral or BLM surface, we are required, and there's a release, an incident, we are required to notify them through the notice to lessees, the NTL 3A process. And what that is if we have a significant spill, a venting event, a fire, or an injury, a fatal injury, or a blowout, those all require notification to BLM, and also if it's on their surface.
So this is where OSHA comes in, and we talk about reportable versus recordable. If you're interested and you're a policy nerd, they're the CFRs if you want to look them up. Recordable is much more common, right? We get into most injuries. These wind up on an OSHA 300 log that have to be published and submitted within the workplace. And these are things anywhere from illness, prescription medication for someone who gets injured, lost time accidents, those sort of things. It then scales up to what is reportable. And reportable to OSHA is any work-related fatality, any inpatient hospitalization, or any amputation or loss of an eye is reportable to OSHA within 8 hours.
So we're going to go through a few examples, just typical responses in that notification process.
So we had a fire actually just down the road from here. We were cleaning some tanks, and we had kind of a spontaneous combustion. So how this went down is the call went into 911 when this happened, and then a call went into our operations control center. We at Caerus are fortunate enough to have a 24-hour control room in our facility. These guys have access to SCADA, SIGNET, all sorts of automation, more than 1 million data points that are monitored almost constantly and throw into alarm. But we rely on them to kind of handle our 911 contact and stay on the phone with 911 and relay information back and forth. They're able to access all of our files, all the data we need. They're a great support system. So call would go into OCC. OCC then would dispatch company people, EHS if needed, operators, so on and so forth. After this all went down, everybody was on location within about 20 minutes. Fire was out by the time I got there, and nobody was injured, thankfully. Notification went into COGCC verbally and then in the form of a Form 22 because it was a fire, unintended. We notified the BLM because this was on a BLM location. We also notified Garfield County, notified the landowner. Then we went through cleanup and repair. We did a taproot investigation on this incident trying to determine the cause of ignition. Obviously, oil and gas, we've always got oxygen, we've always got flammable material. The unknown quantity is our ignition source, and that is really difficult to pin down. We pinned it down to 3 potential things, and once we kind of had our heads wrapped around it, we brought in everybody who performs this work for us in the field, sat down, reviewed this incident, and also talked about lessons learned from just cleaning tanks in general. So that's kind of just an example of how these things tend to go.
And I wanted to point out here, in this incident, we made 4 notifications to COGCC, BLM, Garfield County, and the landowner, all within, I would say, an hour of this incident occurring. So a typical spill to surface water, we don't like when this happens, but unfortunately it does occasionally. And in a similar fashion, we have response steps. As Reed mentioned, you would call your operations control center and start your incident command if you needed it. We typically, in a spill like that reaches surface water, you're going to isolate the source and you're going to deploy initial spill cleanup. In this situation, a notification to the National Response Center is required immediately. COGCC immediately. If BLM minerals were involved or if it was on surface, we would make an immediate notification. Garfield County or any county involved would have an immediate notification, and the landowner would also be notified. And it doesn't stop with a phone call. If we can't locate the landowner, we will physically go try to find them. Of course, cleanup and repair starts immediately after the discovery, isolation, and then long-term remediation solutions are implemented. With any incident, most companies do an investigation, a taproot, and then a prevention plan moving forward.
Injury, real similar. Call goes into Operations Control Center. We're lucky enough to have those guys and be able to communicate straight to them what we need. We've had them call in the helicopter, call in the ambulance, call in the fire department. We're real fortunate in that regard. So the call goes into 911. Then internal calls go out, operators, anybody who has resources in the area that can help facilitate, secure the location, give whatever medical we can on site. We have guys trained as emergency medical responders that are kind of strung throughout the field. They're kind of just a grade below EMT because our operating area is so large that our response times can be really great. And so we have those resources available to us. And then along those lines, if it fell in the reportable realm, Form 22s, report to Garfield County if anyone else is potentially in harm's way. Lessons learned and communication throughout the field as much as we can to try and prevent any other incidents.
Okay, we're going to talk about some supporting programs and procedures. This is the best management practices that we employ on top of regulatorily required things.
Yeah, so this is a site safety plan. We develop them for every location we do any work on. Usually these are developed around drilling and completions time. Completions owns a lot of these. What they contain are turn-by-turn driving directions, lat long, anything that would be requested by 911, and also direct contact phone numbers to resources within and exterior. So we don't just dial 911, right? We have dispatch for Rio Blanco County, for Garfield County, so on and so forth, direct numbers, because you get out in the boonies out here where we do some of our operations and you dial 911, you could land on on any dispatch center in western Colorado at least. So we keep direct phone numbers on here, and this is posted on every location. We also have emergency protocols. This is a pretty standard thing. Define levels of emergency and when you would get higher ups within the company involved. If you needed additional resources, if you needed financial, if somebody had to unlock the purse and get some funds coming your way because you needed to do whatever you needed to do, that's what this kind of facilitates. Lets our guys know all the resources available to them. And again, this also has all the direct phone numbers to any emergency responder they would need to contact. Just a quick example, we have an H2S specific area that we acquired from Noble. We do operations a little bit differently there, and so we have some different protocols for operating those wells and also responding to any incident in that area. We've done pre-planning meetings with the fire department and with EMS should we ever have something happen there. Essentially, we have our own SCBA teams, guys who carry around air packs and bottles should they have to go into a hazardous environment. And so we basically have a meeting point that we determined ahead of time with the fire department. If we called this in, we would do the extraction and get them to this pre-planned point just to facilitate. CareFlight, obviously I talked about, we have some remote stuff. We've done some pre-planning with these guys ahead of time. We had a really unique scenario in which we had multiple operations going on in the end of a box canyon, essentially. And if something were to go wrong, there are no real escape routes. So we did some pre-planning with these guys. If something did happen, we would call in a search and assist. They would fly and help us get our people out if they were to become trapped in some way. CareFlight's been great. They're right out of this hospital right here. And they were actually started because of oil and gas. Their initial funding came from operators going to them saying, we have this need in this area. We're going to go ahead and fund the beginning of this company. So they've been awesome to work with.
So along with the best management practices, we also run drills. We have annual response training. We do tabletops, we do mock drills, we deploy equipment, and of course we just are constantly training our employees and contractors. In addition to training, we have spill trailers and spill kits placed throughout the field, and we educate everyone within our company and our contractors, and quite frankly, any operator, any individual would need these resources, we'd be willing to share them, and we have maps available to show those locations.
And all of this is stored in KMZ files within our public drive, and should we call in something to OCC, the Operations Control Center, they would be able to pull this up and help us coordinate response. These things are updated all the time about where we're staging our resources and what we have available to us.